Welcome, everybody. It's wonderful to see so many familiar names and so many unfamiliar ones. We're very happy to welcome you to this mini conference of Yachad BeYeshua. My name is Judith Wolf. I'm one of the 3 moderators of Yachad BeYeshua, which is an international interconfessional fellowship of Jewish disciples of Jesus. Today, tomorrow, and Thursday, we will be discussing the mission of Yachad BeYeshua, which is summarized in our mission statement, which is uniting Jewish disciples of Jesus in loving fellowship as a witness of God's faithfulness to Israel and to the church. Our presenter today will be Mark Kinzer, who is the overall moderator of Yachad BeYeshua, and he will speak to us about loving fellowship and faithful witness. Mark's presentation will be followed by 2 short responses from Yachad BeYeshua members Svetlana Panich and Stuart Dauermann. Throughout the presentations, you may use the Q&A tab in your Zoom interface to ask questions, which we'll then get to at the end of the presentation and the 2 responses. We'll have about 15 minutes or so of Q&A, and as you listen to the presentations, please feel free to put your questions in the chat already. At the top of the hour, we'll shift gears and we'll hear a report from Mark on developments in Yachad BeYeshua over the past year and our plans for the coming year. This will serve as our annual general meeting. Before Mark speaks, I will lead us in an opening prayer, which is taken from the Book of Common Prayer for the season of Advent. Please pray with me. Almighty God, give us grace that we may cast away the works of darkness and put upon us the armor of light, now in the time of this mortal life, in which thy Son, Jesus Christ, Yeshua HaMashiach, came to visit us with great humility, that in the last day, when he shall come again in his glorious majesty to judge both the quick and the dead, we may rise to the life immortal, through him who liveth and reigneth with thee and the Holy Ghost, one God, now and forever. Amen. Mark, may I ask you to speak?
Thank you so much, Judith. And I am going to share my screen. How does loving fellowship among Jewish disciples of Yeshua bear witness before Israel and the church to God's faithfulness to Israel and the church? Jewish mystical tradition points us in the direction of an answer. And excuse me. It teaches that there are 600,000 letters in the Torah, each corresponding to one of the 600,000 root souls of the people of Israel. This leads to an interpretation of the name Israel as an acronym for the saying, Yesh Shishim Ribo Otiot La Torah. There are 600,000 letters in the Torah. As the Jewish philosopher Emanuel Levinas put it, it's as if the multiplicity of persons within the people of Israel were the condition for the plenitude of absolute truth, as if every person, through his or her uniqueness, were the guarantee of the revelation of a unique aspect of truth. This means that all Jews, with our widely divergent backgrounds and opinions, need one another. Only together do we grasp and express the truth of God. I would propose here that this is also the case for Jewish disciples of Yeshua, who are meant to be a kind of microcosm of the Jewish people as a whole, just as the Jewish people themselves are a kind of microcosm of humanity. Our mission is to confess the faithfulness of God to Israel and the church as enacted in the crucified and resurrected Messiah. We can only fulfill that mission together in loving fellowship with one another. What in my own journey has led me to this conclusion? My first encounter with Yeshua had no obvious connection to Israel or the church. It had everything to do with God, who had laid hold of me through this strange figure from ancient history. I'd been on a philosophical quest for truth. Instead, truth found me. I was a Jew, but Jewish religion had no attraction for me. That changed when my first mentor in Yeshua, Haskell Stone of blessed memory, sent me back to my family's synagogue. The shul in which I had become bar mitzvah turned out to be quite a different place when one entered it with faith in the living God. To my great surprise, I discovered there that God was not only the living truth for me personally, but also the covenant partner who kept faith with Israel, even when Israel did not keep faith with him. But the church remained an alien mystery to me. That changed several months after my return to synagogue. Beginning my second year at the University of Michigan, I attended the prayer meetings of an interdenominational charismatic community founded by Roman Catholics. I was enthralled by what I experienced there. The worship of the community offered a taste of the world to come, and their life together bore witness to Yeshua's power to reconcile those formerly estranged. Here were Jew and Gentile, white and black, Latino and Asian American, Protestant, Catholic, and Orthodox, sharing an intense communal life. And yes, that is indeed me in the middle of that photo. This was the good news of Jesus, visible and touchable in the form of a diverse group of people living in loving fellowship. At first, I couldn't understand how these fervent followers of Jesus could be so loyal to their, in my view, lifeless denominations. But through these Christian friends, I gradually came to a new conviction that I couldn't embrace the New Testament's witness to Yeshua while showing contempt for those throughout history who had transmitted that book and its message from generation to generation. Somehow God had kept faith with the church, even when the church had not kept faith with him. All of this took place in 1971, when the Messianic Jewish movement was still in its infancy. For the next 6 years, I found my own way as a Jewish follower of Jesus, attending Shabbat services at the local conservative synagogue, where I sensed God's continued presence among his people, and becoming a leader of the interdenominational community that had taught me about loving fellowship and God's faithfulness to the church. My first experience of the Messianic Jewish movement occurred in 1977 at the Kansas City Conference on the Holy Spirit. Our community was helping to organize the event, which brought together tens of thousands of charismatics from all over the world and from multiple denominations. I served as the administrative assistant for the Messianic Jewish segment of the conference. Overseeing this segment was David Stern, future translator of the New Testament. I served as David's right hand, and thus began a friendship that continues to this day. For me, the 1977 Kansas City Conference was a double revelation. On the one hand, I heard an urgent prophetic call to work for the healing of Yeshua's broken body, and saw at the same time the essential role which Yeshua's Jewish followers were called to play in that healing process. This conference brought together Catholics, Orthodox, mainline Protestants, and evangelicals who disagreed about almost everything, but all seemed eager to listen to the Messianic Jews. Judaism offered a possible key to unlock the gates of ecumenical engagement. On the other hand, I was shocked at the level of discord that existed among the Messianic Jewish leaders themselves at the conference. At one session, it seemed as though a fist fight was about to break out between two of the most well-known presenters, with David Stern acting as a reluctant referee. How could Jewish disciples of Yeshua be a balm for the wounds of the people of God when we were inflicting wounds on one another? As I studied the modern history of Jewish believers in Jesus, I discovered that my experience in Kansas City was no anomaly. The Hebrew Christians of the 19th and early mid-20th centuries were all upstanding members of their diverse churches who identified ethnically as Israelites, but religiously as Christians. They welcomed all Protestant Jews to their fellowship, but of course, Catholic or Eastern Orthodox Jews need not apply. At the turn of the 20th century, a new impulse became visible among them, leading some Hebrew Christians to seek a stronger connection to the Jewish community and more traditionally Jewish forms of religious practice. The leadership of the Hebrew Christian movement rejected this new impulse and labeled it as Judaizing. But it survived as a dissenting underground current, as seen in the life of my beloved mentor, Haskell Stone. In the late 1960s, the embers of this revival of Jewish identity were stirred into flame. What became known as Messianic Judaism soon overwhelmed and marginalized the old Hebrew Christian establishment. The tables were turned, and Messianic Jews now treated Hebrew Christians as the outsiders. Unsurprisingly, Messianic Judaism itself soon became fractured. Missionaries tangled with those focused on building congregations. Charismatics disputed with non-charismatics. Leaders of the congregational movement divided over matters of governmental structure. Those seeking a closer relationship to the wider Jewish community struggled against those more closely tied to the evangelical world. In the midst of such internal disarray, it was difficult to hear a divine call to serve the unity of the whole people of God, Jewish and Christian. We learn a different way by attending to the early history of the Yeshua movement. In its first proclamation, the good news of Yeshua took communal form in a body of Jews that was a microcosm of all Israel, and thus also of all the nations. Luke tells us in the book of Acts that devout Jews from every nation under heaven were gathered in Jerusalem for the holiday of Shavuot, Pentecost. They were astonished to hear the Galilean disciples of Yeshua proclaiming the mighty deeds of God in the languages of the diaspora. Through the Messiah and the gift of the Spirit, God was overcoming the discord among nations that had its origins at the Tower of Babel. But those who heard the message on Pentecost were not actually members of those nations. On the contrary, they were all Jews. That is, Jews who resided among the nations and now spoke the languages of their hosts. Jews of the land of Israel proclaimed the Messianic revelation, and Jews from the diaspora received it. This diverse group of Jews became the first Spirit-empowered community of the resurrected Messiah. In their life together of fellowship, koinonia, summarized so memorably in Acts 2:42, they embodied the message they had received. From them, revelation went forth to all the nations of the earth. The same dynamic played out in the formation of the New Testament canon. All of these texts were composed by Jewish insiders. Moreover, these insiders reflected the wide range of Jewish perspectives known from their era and viewed the revelation of Yeshua through the lens of those diverse streams of Jewish life. Thus, the author of the Gospel of Mark brings to his material a sensibility resembling what is found in the Enochic tradition of Second Temple Judaism. Luke writes like a Torah-faithful Hellenistic Jew, while John's thinking resembles the stark binaries of light and darkness, truth and falsehood, seen in the writings of the Dead Sea community. And don't let Matthew's polemics against the scribes and Pharisees fool you. He's the most scribal and Pharisaic of the gospel writers, employing many concepts and terms found later in rabbinic literature. As for Paul, he seems to bring all these pieces together as a Hellenistic Pharisee who became an apocalyptic visionary. Just as the Torah of 600,000 letters requires the interpretive collaboration of 600,000 Israelites, and just as the initial proclamation of the good news required a community of Jews from all the nations, so now the textual vessel fashioned for that good news, the New Testament, required the voices of every major stream of Jewish life of that era in order to convey the infinite richness of divine revelation. It seems as though the entire community of Israel, present through divinely appointed representatives, was intimately bound up with the good news. The Messianic fellowship of Pentecost comprised Jews from many different backgrounds, and they often found it difficult to get along with one another. Tensions arose first between the Hebrews and Hellenists, but after that, it seems as though Paul was always a party to the disputes. Paul and Barnabas, Paul and Peter, Paul and James, Paul and the other Pharisaic members of the community. Despite it all, they somehow managed to keep it together and to lay the groundwork for a movement that has endured for 2,000 years. Tragically, after 2 Jewish wars with Rome, Jewish disciples of Yeshua became marginalized members of the community that their ancestors had founded. With hostility between leaders of the church and of the Jewish people intensifying, the ecclesia of the circumcision disappeared as a visible corporate presence in the body of the Messiah. Now that body lacked any visible expression of Jewish life, much less one that was itself a microcosm of the Jewish people. Against this historical backdrop, the 19th century emergence of Hebrew Christianity and the 20th century appearance of Messianic Judaism, Jewish Catholicism, and Eastern Orthodox Jewish identity was something of a miracle. Despite their contentious relationships with one another, groups of Jewish disciples of Jesus were once again a visible presence among the people of Israel and within the church. And in our own 21st century, a new miracle is taking place. While the world around us has become more polarized and fragmented, formerly estranged Jewish disciples of Yeshua are finding one another and are becoming friends. This miracle preceded the birth of Yachad BeYeshua, and our new fellowship is but one expression of its power. In light of this 21st century process of healing among Jewish disciples of Yeshua. The vocations of James, Paul, and Peter take on new meaning. All three were Jewish disciples of Yeshua, and all three remained loyal to the Jewish people and the Jewish tradition. For them all, the death and resurrection of Jesus represented God's faithful confirmation of the covenant promises to Israel, for Israel's benefit and for the blessing of the nations. But each was called to a different way of bearing witness to God's faithfulness. James was called to be deeply rooted in the center of Jewish life in Jerusalem. As a devout Jew, he won the respect of the wider Jewish community while bearing witness to the resurrected Messiah. Paul was called to live among non-Jews, carrying the message of Yeshua to the nations of the world and announcing and embodying God's intention to reconcile Jew and Gentile under the Messiah's headship. And Peter shouldered the formidable task of bridging the gap between Paul and James, holding together this incredibly dynamic, diverse, and at times discordant movement. The future of the faith they shared depended on their commitment to one another. Miraculously, amidst all the disagreements and tensions, they managed to stick together. Jewish disciples of Jesus face the same challenge in our own days. Not all are called to join us as members of Yachad BeYeshua, but all are summoned to realize in their individual lives the mission that Hashem has given us as a group, to unite Jewish disciples of Yeshua in loving fellowship, as a witness before Israel and the church of God's faithfulness to Israel and the church. The loving fellowship with one another, which Yachad BeYeshua seeks to embody, is not our task alone. But if we embrace it and are faithful to it, we will open doors of healing for other Jewish disciples of Yeshua and for the twofold people of God as a whole. In our faithfulness to God and to one another, to Israel and to the church, we participate in God's own faithfulness through the Messiah by the Spirit. Israel is a microcosm of the nations, and we Jewish disciples of Yeshua are a microcosm of Israel. As such, we are all letters of the Torah, and only together do we spell out the name of Yeshua, the living Torah, the one who is God's definitive yes to Israel, the church, and all creation. Let us find our individual places in the scroll and be inscribed together as a word of reconciliation and hope for the entire world. Thank you.
Thank you, Mark. That was beautiful. We will now hear a short response to Mark's presentation from Svetlana Panich, who was born in the Ukraine, studied in Moscow and Krakow, and now lives in Vilnius. Svetlana writes translations and essays and researches Jewish Christianity in the Russian-speaking world and in Eastern Europe more generally. Welcome, Svetlana.
Thank you, Judith. Thank you, Mark. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yes. Okay, so first I'd like to thank you, Mark, for an excellent, amazing presentation, so rich in ideas and so encouraging to develop your thoughts that it seems impossible to comment this text in 5 minutes. So I'd like to limit myself with emphasizing some of key words and concepts that seem to me most significant. The first keyword is diversity. I think that it is the most important, the most impressive call, not only to the Jewish disciples of Christ, Christ, but also for for the modernity as a whole. Diversity that is seen not a reason for the endless contradictions, but both as a challenge and as a source of creative unity of Jewish disciples of Yeshua, people coming from different backgrounds and traditions. It is by accepting their diversity, by reflecting on it as a source of their richness, and by sharing it with each other, by sharing it in all its variety, they commonly can create the universe of Jewish Christianity and contribute to the reconciliation of the bigger microcosm, to the reconciliation of the world. The second essential theme on my mind is the connection of loving fellowship and witnessing, and as well as the idea of the mission of Yachad BeYeshua mission as a witnessing by loving fellowship. Not only, or maybe not mainly, by words or theological declarations, but by the specific witness of our presence in the polarized, in the fragmented world. Such statement, on my mind, both significant and challenging, especially in the context when such words as love, love, fellowship, and all this, let's say, religious stuff, sometimes put under the question and constantly need more and more clarification. We, as Jewish disciples of Christ, can clarify their meaning and can restore their meaning just by our presence and by our acting with each other and accepting our diversity, not as here I would like to paraphrase the words of Emmanuel Levinas, who was also mentioned by Mark. Jewish call to otherness demands from us respect and embrace the otherness of others, and to see each other as a gift of the bigger diversity of the created world. And the second and the third that on my mind follows from the Mark's message is a specific call of Jewish disciples of Messiah. I would like to point just two dimensions of this call, of this task that both prophetic and eschatological. The first is a call for healing the wounded body of Messiah. It includes the recognition of our own healing and a recognition of the need to heal our own church relationships, interpersonal relationships, but trying to do it from inside our group, from inside our context, we can contribute to the bigger healing. And the second is a call to be a sign of unity and hope, both for the alienated world and for the divided church. In fact, to be a seed of the new eschatology. This call is incredibly hard, but accepting it even intellectually as something of some kind of a perspective. We as microcosm can contribute to the history of the bigger universe of God's dealing, of God's faithfulness to the world. Thank you. That's all for now.
Thank you very much, Svetlana. We'll now hear a second response from Stuart Dauermann. Stuart Dauermann is an author and rabbi who has been a pioneering leader in the Messianic Jewish movement and will be known to many of you through his work and his music, which includes one of my favorite songs, The Trees on the Field. Stuart, may I invite you to come?
I don't know, can you see me?
Not quite yet.
All right.
We can hear you though,
All
but
right.
you had your camera on before.
Okay, just a moment. I'll try
There you
it
are.
again. There you are. I apologize. We had a storm here and all my Wi-Fi is down. So, Mark's excellent big picture vision pointed out more than once where he mentioned little foxes that spoil the vineyard, which is interpersonal conflict. There is an ancient solution that needs to be adopted, adapted, or at least considered for the global context of Yachad BeYeshua in order for us to intercept this problem of interpersonal breakdown. We learned from Mark's story that renewal begins at the microcosmic level. Mark, in the Word of God community, living in households with others, and then at the synagogue where perhaps there were 10, maybe 15 people there on a weekday, that small community renewed his Jewishness. And then Haskell Stone with his small coterie of disciples renewed his spiritual life. In my own life also, as I look back, I came to Yeshua faith around a lunch table in the cafeteria of Manhattan School of Music. And I was nurtured in my faith in a smaller Bible study group and in a household prayer meeting, eventually even in a house church. Now, I didn't seek these things out of some kind of doctrinaire preference, but because that's where the fire was. In the early church, the strength and unity of the macro context was dependent on the strength and unity of the micro context. Consider for a moment the honeycomb. Honeycomb can be huge, very large, very strong, but its strength is determined by the hexagonal cells, thousands of them, that are all in themselves strong. So for us, unity and maturity in the family of God, in Yachad BeYeshua, will require structures that trigger and support familial relationships. That is, if we are to avoid relational breakdown. In the first 3 centuries, we know that all of the Yeshua communities were households. Joseph Hellerman teaches us that for Yeshua, for Paul, and the early church leaders throughout the Roman Empire, the preeminent model that defined the Christian church was the strong group Mediterranean family. God was the father, Yeshua was the elder brother, and believers, Jewish and Gentile, were brothers and sisters. The group came first over the aspirations and desires of the individual. If we're going to have and be influential in helping to form one big happy family, this comes from developing small happy families. This is not a secret in Jewish life either. In Jewish life, the home is called the Mikdash Ma'at. And in Europe, before the Shoah, one of the things that gave structural integrity to the Jewish community were chevrot of all kinds, chevrot to study various holy books, the Mishnah, the Talmud, the Mikra, chevrot Kadisha for burying the dead, you name it, there was an association for it. And these were small groups of people that honeycombed together to form a strong communal structure. In church history, we see the same thing. Renewal movements like the monastic movement, various Roman Catholic orders with their various charisms. In the Protestant world, the Wesleyan classes, it's interesting that John Wesley's father, Samuel, admired the monastic movement, which was pretty good for a 17th century Protestant. He admired the monastic movement, and John himself created groups he called classes. He would not evangelize unless he could enfold people in a group he called a class. In a Latin sense, these were house churches, really. We cannot be one big happy family until we have learned to be many small happy familial groups. Now, I don't know how that's going to work out in Yachad BeYeshua, but I would say that the structural integrity of Yachad BeYeshua and the example that it sets for the church as a whole will be dependent upon smaller groups where relationships are deepened and can really work out. I want you to remember in conclusion the symbol of the honeycomb. The strength of the whole is based on the integrity of the smaller cells, of the smaller parts. The way to limit the little foxes spoiling the vineyard is to strengthen the microcosm, familial gatherings of the people of God, sharing meals around the table. There is something transformative about sharing a meal together, even apart from the Eucharist. This is where Yeshua taught, and this is where we will learn to be his family, Yachad BeYeshua. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Stuart. Thank you both panelists and Mark, especially for your presentation. I now invite all the panelists to turn on their cameras, and we'll have about 20 minutes of Q&A. Mark, I will read out the questions from the chat, and please, everybody, the chat is open. The Q&A is open, so please do type your questions in, and I will ask them on your behalf. The first question comes from Jordan Blanchard and is primarily, I think, for Mark, although anybody can contribute. What do you think are the limits to how diverse Jewish practice can be while remaining an accepted expression of Messianic Judaism? When it comes to the debate on kashrut, for example, should we see this as an acceptable opinion on which to differ, or do we interpret it under the verse, "He who breaks the least of these commands and teaches others to do the same," etc.? I should also say that we will talk a little bit more about this tomorrow in the second response to my presentation, but I would be very interested in hearing initial responses from Mark or the two other panelists.
Yes, thank you for that question, Jordan. I think what the question brings out is really the need for not only a diversity of Jewish believers of Yeshua in terms of individuals, but a diversity of corporate expressions of the life of Jewish disciples of Yeshua. And I mean, I think like something like kashrut really requires a community, and it requires a community of people who have an agreed set of patterns of life and of customs that they're going to live out together. Jewish disciples of Yeshua in Yachad BeYeshua do not have that kind of agreement, and our goal is not to try to come to some kind of universal consensus among every Jewish disciples of Yeshua about our approaches to kashrut. That is a hopeless endeavor. I mean, the reality is, even internal to the Messianic Jewish movement, which is only one segment of the broader reality of Jewish disciples of Yeshua, we have diverse approaches to kashrut rather than one approach. I think that what we need to be able to have are different kinds of groupings, and this is the sort of thing that Stuart, I think, was helpfully pointing us to different types of communal expressions of life, which can corporately embody the different perspectives that we have as Jewish disciples of Yeshua. But then what we also need are these kind of broader structures, that bring together Jewish disciples of Yeshua across those different kinds of boundaries to express the fact that we recognize one another as brothers and sisters, and that we realize that the mission we have is not one that can be fulfilled by one of the little segments or subgroups among us. What I would say, and maybe a final point here, is I'm not trying to say that in Yachad BeYeshua we should never have public expressions of our of the arguments that we have about these matters. I mean, I think there would not be any problem to have a panel at some Yachad BeYeshua event which involved a discussion among different leaders in Yachad BeYeshua from different positions about the area of kashrut. The point is, we would not be trying to kind of compel one another to kind of come over to our approach, and if you don't come over, somehow or another, our relationship is endangered. Instead, it becomes a kind of communal engagement where we are, where the discussion of these issues, which we all consider of great importance, becomes something that even in our differences unites us rather than divides us. I don't know if either Stuart or Svetlana want to add anything.
Stuart, anything from you?
Anything from me? I
say no.
agree. I'm sorry. I think that the smaller groupings that I suggested should also be smaller groupings that have diversity. They don't need to be homogeneous. We can only work out our relational bumps in the road, so to speak, if we have face-to-face contact. I believe in face-to-face spirituality. And it doesn't need to be homogeneous groups. They can be somewhat heterogeneous, but it's over the table, that looking eye to eye, that many things work out. And right now, our virtual space is kind of an adaptation of that expectation. That's all I have to say.
Thank you. The next question comes from Yochanan Oikel. He says it's a simple question. I'm not sure that it actually is. It goes as follows. When these moderators, when all of us go to sleep, when we die, will we be honored as a Jew, a Christian, or as you live, a Messianic Jew? And how do you know that dignity in death will be assured?
For me, you know, as the Apostle Paul said, for me to live is Christ, to die is gain. And he says to be absent from the body is to be present with the Lord. I would imagine for all of us, our hope is based upon the incarnate Son of God, who loved us, gave himself for us, and risen and ascended to the Father's right hand. Whether we honor him within the context of Messianic Judaism or any other context is not unimportant, but it's not the point. The point is that our relationship with God, our salvation with God, is determined by who Yeshua is, rather than by precisely where we happen to fit ourselves.
Yeah, well, I think just one short comment on this is, I think that this has been a question that has been a very difficult one in the past, in part because there have been no corporate expressions or few corporate expressions of Jewish life in Yeshua. And so Jews had a choice. Were they going to die as Jews, or were they going to die as Christians? You know, are you going to be buried in a Christian cemetery? Are you going to be buried in the Jewish cemetery? You know, were you going to have someone who was going to say Kaddish for you, or did you not want anyone to say Kaddish for you? Or were there going to be masses said for you, or what? I mean, I think that these are very, very difficult questions that but they're important Jewish questions, because Jews think generationally. For me, when I'm thinking generationally about what we're doing here, I recognize, I'm convinced that the ultimate fruit of what we're trying to do in Yachad BeYeshua is something that I will not see in my lifetime. And that this is a kind of multi-generational quest, endeavor that we're involved in. But I'm convinced that part of the fruit of it will be a capacity for us to pass on life from one generation, Jewish life in Jesus, from one generation to the next, in a way that we're not always forced to make this choice. Do you die as a Christian or do you die as a Jew?
Svetlana.
I'm speaking from the place where during Shoah, about 96% of Jews, whoever they were, practicing Jews, Hasids, or followers of Vilna Gaon, or Jewish Christians, were persecuted, were killed just because they were Jews. No one did ask them how they die as Jews or as parishioners of the All Saints Church that was located in the Vilna Ghetto, and it was a church for Vilna Jewish Christians. And thinking on this question, I would say that for me, it is more important to be faithful to the memory and to the sacrifice of those who gave me this land just to live there as Jewish Christian, and not to divide between as Jew, between die as Jew, having Kaddish and days of Shiva, or as Christians having Christian funeral, but to die as a Jewish Christian, person of, I would say, person of two heritages, who is faithful to both of them, and who is faithful to the one from the big letter O, to the one who gave me this heritage. We are not living in the empty space. We are living in the big space of historical memory. And on mind, it is very important to think about it when we are trying to identify ourselves as Jewish disciples of Messiah. Thank you.
Thank you. We have two questions that go together. They're primarily for Stuart, but with responses welcome from anybody. They're from Russ Resnick and from Antoine Levy. How would you see the model of small familial groups applying to Yachad BeYeshua? Are you encouraging Yachad BeYeshua members to apply it within their various contexts outside of Yachad BeYeshua, or to apply it to the fellowship itself? And if the latter, and this is Antoine's follow-up question, what will be the main elements from which we can derive these strong family ties within Yachad BeYeshua, since we don't have a church community within Yachad BeYeshua from which to derive them?
Those matters are too wonderful to me, too wonderful for me. It is high, I cannot attain to it. That's what the book of Psalms says. And it says that about, this is a very big question. And I'm going to give a Mark Kinzer kind of answer. And that is, this is not something for me to solve. It is something for the community to solve. My suggestion is that relational maturity and relationship with God, relational maturity with people and relationship with God are coordinate. Jesus said the two greatest commandments are coordinate, they're not hierarchical. So that we need to create, if we're going to grow in our relationship with God within Yachad BeYeshua, we must grow in relationship with each other. And to do that, we need context of face-to-face relationship where we can grow in our relational holiness. Now, how that would, I just wanted to throw that out for Yachad BeYeshua. I don't have any great master plan for Yachad BeYeshua in this regard. It would be presumptuous. But historically, this and all the way from creation, it is in the familial structure that relational holiness is worked out, and that therefore the image of God is perfected. And if Yachad BeYeshua were only an organization that considers itself with the big picture, I think we'd be deceiving ourselves, because we don't work out the nitty-gritty of relational growth in the big picture. We work it out face to face. And I leave it on the table for the leadership of Yachad BeYeshua to, number one, consider if that's true, and number two, answer the question, if it is true, then how then shall we live? What shall we do?
Thank you. Mark, you will have some things to say about this, I expect, after the hour. Would you like to say anything now as well, or just postpone to then?
I certainly, I thought Stuart's answer was really an excellent one. And I do think that that in fact, it's in working out these kinds of questions and figuring out the kind of common pattern of life, what does hold us together, how are we going to be together and live together, that in some ways the relationships themselves become formed and deepened and strengthened. And rather than seeing this as a kind of insuperable obstacle to coming together, the very act of working on the questions becomes a way of coming together. So I'm hopeful about the process, even though I acknowledge that the challenges are daunting.
Thank you. We have time for one or perhaps two more questions. I'll ask one and we'll see how long your answers are, because they might be quite long. Here it comes. It's from John Cantor. What are some key issues that all Messianic Jews and Jewish Christians, we can probably add, can unite around as means of facilitating reconciliation within the wider body of Messiah? So some of the key issues that we can unite around as a means of facilitating reconciliation within the body of Messiah.
Probably the issue of supersessionism. I think it's one of the contributions we can make. That is healing the wounds and building bridges. I think Mark's work and that of others in the post-supersessionist theological group, etc., is a step in the right direction. But I think that it's always going to be the water under the ice in Yachad BeYeshua, something that needs to be addressed. Number one, because the currents of supersessionism run under the surface of some of the communions with which our members are involved. And secondly, it's becoming for a group such as this of Jews in the body of Christ to address this issue. It would be very peculiar for this issue not to be addressed. So I would say supersessionism and what it means to be post-supersessionist is one of those issues.
Yeah, I was going to say something very similar to Stuart. I think that there are the issues of supersessionism and of anti-Judaism in the history of the church. These are issues that are being raised within each of the traditions, Christian traditions. And I think that as each different Christian body comes to grips with this issue, it opens up the possibility of Israel, of the Jewish people, being able to function as a focal point of unity. I think that once we've come to that, there's all kinds of resources that are possible. I mean, I mentioned in my presentation, that I had been a leader within this community, this ecumenical community in Ann Arbor. I was part of that group for about 20 years. And one of my roles in this group, which had members from all of the different sorts of churches you can imagine, along with some Messianic Jews, was actually to function as a kind of point of theological unity. And so, for example, in trying to talk about seasons and how we approach holidays and things of that sort, many of the Protestants in the community were more willing to listen to me talking about the way the calendar functions in Jewish tradition than they were willing to listen to their Catholic friends about the Catholic liturgical year. But it opened them up to being able to even appreciate elements of the Catholic or Orthodox tradition when they were able to see it first within the positive role it has within the Jewish tradition. So I've seen something similar in the theological realm in terms of the Eucharist. A lot of the greater measure of reconciliation and positions between Protestants and Catholics and Orthodox about the Eucharist have come through deeper studies about the underlying Jewish roots of the Eucharist. Yeah, that's all I would have to say at this moment.
That's very helpful. Thank you. And we are at the end of our time for this segment. Svetlana, would you like to make a last comment on it?
I'd like just to add something to what Mark did say. I think that together with looking at the liturgical traditions, at the feasts and calendar, it would be necessary to look at the history of Jewish Christianity in the bigger context of the history of Christianity during the centuries, just to see where there were common points, where there were the lines of differences, the lines of conflicts. And I think this historical approach also would help us to see a set of our current problems and complications and to see them realistically. That's all, maybe for now.
Thank you. Thank you very much. If you can hear the church bells outside my room, it is indeed time. I want to thank you all three very much once again for a very rich discussion. And we'll now switch gears. I'll ask Svetlana and Stuart to turn off their cameras and their microphones. And I'll invite Mark back for the last half hour, which will serve as our annual general meeting as Yachad BeYeshua. I invite Mark to give us a 15 to 20-minute report on the state of the fellowship and on our plans for the next year. And then there'll be 10 minutes of Q&A for those who would like to ask any questions. Mark, over to you.
Great. Thank you. Thank you so much. Well, this is will be a bit of a whirlwind report. And I will be covering a lot of ground in a short matter of time. So first, where have we been? Yachad BeYeshua was founded through the Dallas Congress of Jewish Disciples of Yeshua, which took place in August of 2018. So it's a little more than 3 years ago. There were 42 of us present who signed a resolution which expressed our intention to do something like Yachad BeYeshua. We didn't have a name, we didn't have a constitution, a charter, or anything. We just said, we want to work together and come up with something that will allow us to be together in such a fellowship. It took us a little more than a year, and working together as a group of 42, doing this online. But after a year and 4 months, in December of 2019, the Yachad BeYeshua charter was approved by all of those founders. Soon after that, in February of 2020, we elected our first set of moderators, myself and Judith, along with Lee Spitzer, and our international coordinating committee, which consisted of the three of us, plus Antoine Levy, Dave Klein, David Rudolph, Ephraim Radner, Etienne Vetu, and Richard Harvey. In October of 2020, as the pandemic was raging, we had our first public webinar. And that was an introduction to Yachad BeYeshua with Antoine, featuring Antoine and myself, describing our history. And since that time, we've had a whole set of public webinars in which we've talked about the history of the Hebrew Christian Alliance, and a set of seminal figures in our modern history, Joseph Rabinowitz, Edith Stein, Jacob Yach, Cardinal Lustiger, and Father Alexander Men. And in this connection, I wanted to express my special thanks to Amanda Achtman and Jason Maraf, who've done just, I think, a terrific job in hosting the public webinars, and will be continuing to do so in this coming year. In November of 2020, last year, we admitted our first new members, joining the original 42 founders. And really, here I want to thank Lisa Loden and the membership committee, who've worked so hard to both develop the process and to interview new members. And the result is, at this point, we have 144 members of Yachad BeYeshua, 79 identifying as part of the Messianic Jewish caucus, 36 as part of the Catholic and Orthodox caucus, and 29 as part of the Reformation Evangelical Pentecostal caucus. Then, in March of this year, we had our first members webinar. Having gathered together and admitted new members, we began to have some events, online events, in which those members could gather together and talk together about the key issues of our life. And our focus in the members webinars that we've had this year has been on the core values of Yachad BeYeshua, our love of Yeshua, our love of the people of Israel, our love of the body of the Messiah. And I want to especially thank Richard Harvey and Judith Wolf for hosting these and overseeing the members webinars. In July of this year, we established a Yachad BeYeshua Tzedakah Fund. It became clear to us that there were some practical needs that Jewish believers in Yeshua around the world had that we might be able to assist in. And we've received contribution. Through the first 3 quarters of this year, we received $3,500 in donated for that purpose, and all of that, the $3,500 has been distributed to meet needs in Israel and in Canada. Finally, this month, we've had our second election. Our terms of office for those on the International Coordinating Committee is 2 years. And so the term of office for a few of our members ended. And so we've had our election. Dave Klein has been elected for a second term to the International Coordinating Committee. And the new members of the committee are Svetlana Panich, who you all now have had a chance to get acquainted with, and Jennifer Rosner. Etienne Vetu and Richard Harvey are stepping off the International Coordinating Committee. Again, special thanks to them for the great work that they've done and continue to do in serving Yachad BeYeshua. I also want to express thanks to Dave Klein, who has been working as our volunteer overseeing all administration in Yachad BeYeshua, which has been a very big job. And Dave has just done a terrific job there. So that's a summary of where we've been. Now I want to give a short summary of where we're going, at least in the immediate future. There are one of the weaknesses, I think, so far in Yachad BeYeshua has been inadequate communication with our members and our friends. And on this, I take responsibility, mea culpa, and we're working on this area to try to improve communication. And to that end, we will be establishing soon a Yachad BeYeshua newsletter, which we'll be calling Solomon's Portico, which was the place where the Jewish disciples of Yeshua in the Jerusalem community gathered together. In this early next year, we are also going to be establishing Yachad BeYeshua small groups. We've gathered the facilitators, or we've determined who the facilitators will be. We're going to be gathering them together for an online meeting in a couple of weeks. And then those who've indicated their interest, those members of Yachad BeYeshua who've indicated their interest in being part of a small group, we'll get those things running, hopefully by early February. And this is a big experiment. Doing these groups online. We'll be organizing them according to time zones, but we are also trying to put together people who are from, who express different traditions. And hopefully the small groups can be a laboratory for just the sort of work that Stuart was talking about today, where we can truly get to know one another as on an individual basis. We will be having public webinars, 6 public webinars and 3 members webinars in 2022. 3 of the public webinars will be on key historical figures in the history of Jewish disciples of Yeshua. 3 will be on Jewish holidays, and then the 3 members webinars will focus on the Helsinki consultation statements that were developed that lay the theological foundation for what we for our commonality in Yachad BeYeshua. Our next public webinar, will be on January 12th, where Boaz Michael will share with us about the Messianic Jewish pioneer Avram Polyak. And one point here, if you haven't noticed already, our webinars, our public webinars and our members webinars, when they occur, are always on the second Wednesday of the month. They're always on the second Wednesday of the month. And we take off for the summer, July and August, and June. But the rest of the year, there will either be a public webinar or a members webinar on the second Wednesday of every month. We're still planning to go forward with a conference, a summer conference in Dallas, which will be on June 20th through the 23rd. And the plans for the conference are still coming together. And of course, it's rather difficult to do planning of this sort during in the midst of COVID. But at this point in time, we're planning a kind of multi-dimensional conference in which we'll have an on-site event for members of Yachad BeYeshua and potential members of Yachad BeYeshua. So for Jewish disciples of Yeshua and their families or partners. And we will also be streaming morning sessions so that everyone around the world who's interested in tuning in will be able to participate in that way. And we also plan to have open sessions in the evenings for local friends in the Dallas area who hopefully will be able to join us. And then the afternoon sessions will be more, will involve more small group engagement with one another as Jewish disciples of Yeshua. So that's our plan right now for the conference in Dallas, and we'll be getting information out to you all, especially to the members in the next month or so as the plans crystallize. So those are the key elements of our of where we're going in this year. There's one major element in this plan that I want to share about, which is we've decided that our capacity to expand and fulfill our mission depends on our having someone who can oversee all of the practical operations of Yachad BeYeshua. At this point in time, I and the other moderators and some of the others who have various roles in Yachad BeYeshua, we're putting in an enormous amount of time on a volunteer basis, which we plan to continue doing, but we've reached our limits at how far we can go on that basis. And so our aim now is to hire a half-time managing director who can take on this role of overseeing the practical operations of Yachad BeYeshua. Our goal would be to do that, to hire someone in that position by the second half of 2022. In order to do it, however, it's going to require an increase in the funds that are available to us. And so I'm part of what I want to do is appeal to all of you, both members and friends, to be considering how you might be able to contribute in the future financially to Yachad BeYeshua. And on that note, I wanted to give a report on the finances of Yachad BeYeshua, a simple report, really, a very general one. I have here the figures for the first 3 quarters of 2021. These figures don't include designated donations or expenses such as those related to the planning for the conference, conference fund, or the tzedakah funds, which I mentioned already. We've received in the first 3 quarters of 2021 donations of $19,000 for the work of Yachad BeYeshua. Our expenses have been $8,000. We have several people who work on a contract basis for Yachad BeYeshua. A bookkeeper and administrative assistant and someone who handles the website for us. So the $8,000 in part is for those expenses, for Zoom and the other normal expenses for running an operation, a low budget operation like ours. And so this is good. We've brought in more income than we've had expenses. On the other hand, this is not sufficient income for us at this moment to be able to employ a half-time managing director. And so what we'll be doing in the coming years is attempting to increase our resources, our financial resources, so we can move forward in that way. So that's it for the practical report. And now I just want to open things up to if there are any questions that anyone has about where we've been, where we're going, and what our intentions are.
Thank you, Mark. There are two questions in the chat. The first is, could you please repeat the dates, the exact dates of the conference?
Yes, June 20th through 23rd. So that's a Monday through a Thursday, and the intention is to begin in the evening, the Monday evening of the 20th, and then end around noon on Thursday, the 23rd. So
thank you. That should allow everybody to get back home by the Sabbath.
yes.
Excellent. And there's another question from John Cantor. Has there been any discussion about hosting equipping type seminars? And if so, what might those topics be?
We haven't, but what I would say is for questions like that, which are, I would say, even more than just questions, they're helpful recommendations or suggestions for things that we might want to do. We're eager to receive all such input. And so for John, if you could just put together maybe a little more detail of what you're thinking about, what kind of equipping you think would be most valuable or might be valuable. And you can send it on to me, you can send it on to any of the members of the International Coordinating Committee or the moderators or Dave Klein, and we'll be sure that it gets around to us, because I think it's a great idea. So please pass on your thoughts to us.
Thank you. There's an important question from Lynn Jacobson, which I will also answer in the chat, which is, how do we donate?
Yes. The easiest way to donate is on the website. We have a donate button there, and through it's basically, I think, operates through PayPal. But one can also send a check in the mail, and the mailing address of Yachad BeYeshua is found on the website as well. And it's an Ann Arbor address. And so you can always just do it through the postal system, but the easiest way is to do it online.
Thank you. I've put the link of the website in the chat, and I think somebody else is doing so as well. So thank you very much, Richard Harvey. There's a question from Edward Lusher. Can you briefly address the potential role of friends in the movement?
Yeah, this is very important. And we had made this decision that we really wanted to get first get things settled in terms of the pattern of life of our members before we then turned on to try to clarify the role of friends within Yachad BeYeshua. We're still really getting the members' role worked out. As I said, we're just going to be starting these small groups in January. We're just starting the Solomon's Portico, the newsletter, in January, hopefully. My hope is that within the first half of next year, we will be our basic pattern of life for the members of Yachad BeYeshua will become clarified, and that we will then be in a position to take the next step will be to determine what exactly it does mean to be a friend of Yachad BeYeshua and how we can involve you as friends. From the very beginning, we felt that this is it was very important that we were not simply an organization, a fellowship of Jewish disciples of Yeshua, but that we had these relationships with friends who supported our work, who believed in what we were doing, who prayed for us, who wanted to do whatever they could to support us, but also were eager to learn from us or to contribute their wisdom to us. And so this is a relatively undeveloped area for us that needs much more significant development. One final comment on this, the way we're going to do the newsletter, the Solomon's Portico, is it will be a newsletter for the members of Yachad BeYeshua, but which will be available for friends, so that any friends who were eager to find out what was going on with us will be making that available. And so once it's out there, we would hope that those of you who are friends of Yachad BeYeshua will be staying in touch with what's going on with us through Solomon's Portico.
Thank you very much. A question from Florian Borisek. Is this mini conference intended only for the members of Yachad BeYeshua or also for a broader audience?
Yeah, the mini conference is for a broader audience. So this is, we've sent out the invitations for the mini conference to everyone who is on our mailing list. And if you have friends who might be interested in what's going on in Yachad BeYeshua, please let's get them connected to what we're doing. You can always send their email address to Dave Klein, our administrator, so that they'll get on our mailing list. I've had people write to me and ask this: is it okay? I'm not Jewish. Is it okay if I'm attending a public webinar, or if I'm somehow connecting with all of you? And this is not just a little club. We really are eager to expand the reach of what we're doing and the impact that it has. So please spread the word. And these webinars, and then are one of the ways in which that can be done.
And also to say, so the webinars are online on the website that I put in the chat. Yeah. And the public ones are also on YouTube.
Yeah.
There are a few suggestions, Mark, from members about the newsletter and and about reading groups. I won't read them out, but you can see them in the chat. There is, however, a question from Mark Neugebauer. Could you please review the membership procedures for those who are not yet members?
Yes. I wish I had Lisa here. Lisa Loden is the one who is the chair of the membership committee, and for basically it is. I believe that there is some place on the website for being able to indicate interest in membership, and then that will ultimately will go to the membership committee, and they would then respond to it. There's an application basically that people, those who are interested, would fill out, and then would be reviewed by the membership committee, who would then interview the person or have some kind of contact with them.
Excellent, thank you. If there are no other questions at the moment, please do feel free to ask any questions you would like through the contact form on the website or by emailing us. There are many easy ways to get in touch with Mark or with the other moderators of your separate caucuses, or to anybody on the ICC. Please do make use of those. We will reconvene tomorrow at the same time in order to discuss the first of the two constituents of our joint mission, Israel, the Jewish people. I will be talking for 15 to 20 minutes about our mission in relation to Israel, and there will be presentations from their personal perspectives, from their experiences with this, from two members who have rich experience with this. So please do come back tomorrow at the same time. Again, for an hour and a half, there will be occasion for engaging in discussion and asking questions. And the day after that, we'll have the final one of these 3 mini conference seminars where Lee Spitzer, our third moderator, will speak about our mission in relationship to the church. So you'll be very welcome there. I will close us in a short prayer. And before I do that, thank you, Mark, very much for the report. It's wonderful to see all the dispersed work that we've done over so much time come together in a coherent picture. And it is really a very encouraging one. And I'm glad we're on this journey together. Let's close in prayer. O God, from whom all holy desires, all good counsels, and all just works do proceed, give unto thy servants that peace which the world cannot give, that our hearts may be set to obey thy commandments and work for thy glory. And grant that by thee, we, being defended from the fear of our enemies and united in loving fellowship with one another, may pass our time in rest and quietness through Jesus Christ, Yeshua HaMashiach, our Savior. Amen. See you all tomorrow. Thank you very much. Bye.